one of the biggest mysteries surrounding the Bermuda Triangle might have been solved. It was November 15, 1918, and the SS Cotopaxi pulled out of its home port in New York, taking to the seas to begin its career as a freighter ship. A freighter is generally in commission between 25 to 30 years, and with that in mind, one could expect that this new ship would have its fair share of trading in the years to come. However, this stately ship would soon be rolling through some of the most sinister stretch of waters on the planet. Despite it being one of the newest models to come out of the Great Lakes Engineering Works, the country's leading shipbuilding company, the SS Cotopaxi would quickly meet its match across a fateful expanse of ocean. The ship was quickly tasked with several routes between the United States and the eastern coast of South America. Given it wasn't crossing the Atlantic, one would expect things to run fairly smoothly for the little ship. However, not even a year into its service, the port workers in Para, Brazil would see the ship barely afloat. The SS Cotopaxi had established itself as a ship that had laughed in the face of danger many times. Despite its small size, most knew the ship could handle a rough wave or two. However, while on a coal run to Havana, Cuba at the beginning of December 1925, the ship at last met its match. En route from Charleston, South Carolina, an emergency message described the dire conditions that the ship found itself in. Apparently, the SS Cotopaxi was listing and taking on water. After that sole initial message, nothing more was heard. The ship had managed to weather tropical storms before, and many thought that the ship would pull through with ease. However, Havana would be in for a surprise. SS Cotopaxi never touched base with Cuba on their scheduled date of arrival, leaving its client lacking the much-needed coal it was carrying. Nearly a month passed. As of December 31st, the ship was officially listed as overdue. While some might have figured that the ship was just taking its time getting there, others began to fear the worst. While most would think the vast expanses of the Atlantic or Pacific Oceans as holding the gravest dangers for ship making the crossing, this wasn't the case. The particular expanse of waters that the ship had been on had already garnered quite a reputation throughout the 19th century. From the looks of it, the 20th century would be no different. It's far from unheard of for a cargo ship to be a little late on delivery. However, the SS Cotopaxi wasn't just tardy, it had disappeared entirely, never again to pull into port. Some believe that the vessel had fallen victim to its very route, doomed by the menacing space between the island of Bermuda, Puerto Rico, and Florida. It's a triangle that's been shrouded in mystery. Throughout the 19th century, a handful of ships simply vanished while crossing the area. While some would go down the scientific route and blame it on bad weather, others had much more extreme ideas about the Bermuda Triangle. Some would lean towards the notion that the SS Cotopaxi and other vanished ships were being swallowed up by something that defied all logical explanations. For decades, nobody had a concrete explanation as to why ships, and later planes, would continuously vanish when attempting to cross the Bermuda Triangle. It was even believed that the Bermuda Triangle had swallowed the lost city of Atlantis, and that the city's ancient technology was working behind their disappearances. Though these popular theories had no proof to back them up, they propelled the Bermuda Triangle into pop culture. Soon enough, Hollywood big shots had their lens fixed on depicting the mystery. Even famed director Steven Spielberg would flirt with this notion, with the SS Cotopaxi popping up in the desert in his movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And this would be far from its last appearance. Over the decades, many shipwrecks have been discovered off the coast of Cuba and other areas skirting the Bermuda Triangle. While people were quick to point out that each new discovery may have been the SS Cotopaxi, this has often been little more than a mistake or hoax. By the 1980s, numerous divers and fishermen off the Florida coast had become very familiar with a specific area they called the Bear Wreck. The wreck got its name from being the grave of a mystery ship, yet unidentified, that had long ago sunken beneath the murky sea. Some years after the Bear Wreck was first discovered, Michael Barnett, a respected American marine biologist working at the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, took a special interest in the mystery ship. For anyone familiar with this area, discovering a wreck within the bounds of the Bermuda Triangle was like opening up a historical treasure chest. Of all the recorded ships and planes that have mysteriously vanished in the area, where on the charts would this mystery vessel fall? Based off of some of the artifacts that Michael and his crew found surrounding the wreck, he began to formulate a hunch that would give him and his crew an intriguing lead. It was time to get up close and personal with this wreck site. Michael Barnett and his team took a dive below for a closer look at the sunken ship. Time had done quite a number on this anonymous vessel, but some pieces of it had remained rather intact. The team members were able to see that even before the ship had been ruffled by waves, its wooden hatch covers, meant to protect the cargo, were already in very miserable shape. Hatch covers in that kind of shape would be a huge weakness for any ship having to battle with a storm. Continuing their research around the wreck, Barnett and his crew then stumbled upon one piece of evidence that would leave them dumbstruck. The old ship slumbering on the bottom of the reef was unquestionably a sight to behold. However, to make any concrete connections that would point towards this being the SS Cotopaxi, he'd need to get to know the old ship as best as they possibly could. Barnett got his hands on the SS Cotopaxi's original blueprint and descriptions of the machinery on board. Taking this new knowledge with him underwater, Barnett and his crew were able to distinguish some unmistakable similarities between this wreck and the SS Cotopaxi. In fact, the measurements they'd recorded over the span of 12 dives, amazingly, all fell in line with SS Cotopaxi's blueprint descriptions. Despite how promising this find was, they were still missing enough information to prove it was the historical freighter. What Barnett and his crew really wanted to find was perhaps an old sign or bell with the ship's name written on it. Unfortunately, this was nowhere to be found amid the wreckage. Instead, they stumbled across old pieces of coal by the ship, giving them a jolt of hope. However, the most crucial piece of evidence wasn't to be found below the sea, but in the National Archives of New York. While there, Barnett came across records showing that the families of the crew had sued the ship's company. A carpenter even testified, saying that the SS Cotopaxi and similar ships came with a design flaw, which meant water could easily seep into the cargo hold. With those same archives, one clue was waiting, one that would determine the identity of this wreck. While on his research mission in the National Archives of New York, Michael Barnett discovered an overlooked distress signal from the SS Cotopaxi on December 1st, 1925. It placed the ship just a few dozen miles off the coast of Florida, right at the same time that a gigantic storm was raging. It was January 2020, nearly a century after the SS Cotopaxi had floundered, and they'd found it. Armed with concrete facts, the disappearance of this vessel could no longer be attributed to Atlantis nor aliens. At the end of the day, it came down to a flawed design and some horrible weather. Despite finding the SS Cotopaxi at long last, this is far from the end of the mysteries behind the Bermuda Triangle. A range of ships, aircrafts, and people remain completely unaccounted for. As of today, the link between the Bermuda Triangle and the supernatural has been largely severed in the public imagination.